Hello, I'm Noel Crawford. I run a talent agency called Inside Out Talent, and we have been doing a series of interviews with industry folk all over the world in different areas to discuss Covid-19 and how it's affected individuals and different departments in the music industry. Today we're talking to Cary Caldwell who's based out in New Zealand at the moment. Hello, Cary, how are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Thanks for doing this. If you can give us a little bit about your history first, and what worldly events you've worked on and things that you do, and then how the current situation in the first instance, how it's impacted on you.
Well, I'm currently the executive director for a company called the 212 Music Group. We have offices in Brighton in the UK, in Austin, Texas, and now down here in Christchurch, New Zealand. We generally provide logistics and staffing for events in the US, the UK, starting in New Zealand now, and our biggest one would be a festival on the Hong Kong waterfront called Clockenflap. 17 years prior to that, I was the planning manager for the South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas. And that job entailed general logistics stuff like production vehicles, staffing, food and beverage, catering, that sort of thing. My main role was being part of our South by Southwest safety team that hired security, off-duty police officers, reviewed and looked after online threats, stalker situations, stuff like that.
So the South by Southwest role isn't active anymore, or you've moved on from that?
No, it was, rather it was one of those things. It was like on Friday, 6th of March, the city of Austin cancelled South by Southwest. And then on Monday, the 9th, South by Southwest sadly had to lay off about a third of its staff, which, came as a bit of a shock. But I think in hindsight, my wife, who also works for South by Southwest, and she still technically does work for South by, we just took the decision to, leave the US before it got too feral, return to New Zealand. Like I said, it was an unfortunate thing, but I can understand why I was let go. I mean, I sort of spent money as opposed to make the money.
We've been talking about the numbers of people affected and how it trickles down from roles like yours and the number of people you're employing and or recruiting are responsible for. And I don't think a lot of people out there won't realise the numbers involved. So when you say a third were laid off, how many would that be, do you think?
It was initially, I think, about 60 people. Then a number of seasonal staff were, let go earlier than they might have been, about a month earlier. That happened to my wife, Shani, who is the Music Fest production manager. And in terms of staffing from 212, I mean, we provided any number of staffing from like a couple of people at the Vet Fest in the UK to about 25 to 30 people at the Great Escape, all of whom, they were subcontractors, vendors, everything like that, independent contractors, and so they obviously, even 1 week of that was, a fair whack of money that all lose out on.
Yeah, they're the ones that have been hit pretty hard, or they're the ones who are finding it harder to claim support because they're neither one position or the other. But you might not have a number on this. It'd be hard to work it out, I think. But in terms of South by Southwest as a whole, I mean, that's thousands of people
I think last year, I believe the economic impact to the city of Austin was around about $320 million. Well, you take that out, that's a huge hit. And there were, just looking at people working bars, for example. I think I saw a stat somewhere that those people, potentially would rely on 25 to 30% of their earnings just from those 2 weeks. This for the year, just the impact on them was terrible. Yeah. South by uses several thousand volunteers, and whilst like a lot of people say, well, it's a volunteer role, so it's not money, but a lot of people will wait for that event to come along to volunteer for that event. And there are people who have volunteered for South by Southwest for 30 plus years. Just the emotional impact on them was pretty heavy.
I was at a gig shortly before South by Southwest started, I think, and there was a bunch of lads who'd got a slot on a stage for a local band, and they were having a whip round to help them pay for their travel and stuff and support, because they couldn't really afford to get there and stuff. And then literally a couple of days later was announced it was off. So yeah, the number of bands still I think a bunch maybe still travelled over there. I worked with an artist in Norway who did go over. I think she had to get out of there pretty quickly and went over to New York briefly and then got home as quickly as she could from there. So yeah. Do you know if there was a bunch of artists who still travelled and were there, or they're ready? Or
I don't think that there were many artists already there except local artists, obviously, because the first run of South by is the educational conference, which was South by Southwest EDU. So there wouldn't have been a lot of international artists there. I know of a couple of New Zealand artists that were planning on coming over anyway, but then cancelled their flights at the last minute. Not so much about getting in, but it was more about getting back. But 212 had a bunch of crew over, in the week prior to South by Southwest. That flew over from the UK. We also had a number of crew that were coming over, to work, not for 212, but for South by and everything like that. And I do recall that there was a real scramble trying to get flights back. Yeah. First off, change their flights, and if they couldn't change them, trying to book new ones, because even though it was still at the beginning, as you'd say, that we didn't really, I don't think a lot of us fully understood it. It's just, the whole thing was like, the only thing that was going through my mind was that I just got laid off, and it didn't really hit me as hard as it may have hit some other people. Yeah, I don't think a lot of us fully understood the implications of it until we did. And it was like a couple of weeks later that Shani and I looked at sort of things, and the New Zealand government was posting that, the last flights out of America from Air New Zealand, scheduled flights next weekend, and this was on a Tuesday. And so we pretty much flew out on the Friday.
So let's assume that everything will be okay next year, health-wise. Do you think South by might not happen, or it will look very different regardless of the situation? Or you won't be there?
I really don't know. I certainly hope it does, even though a third of the staff were laid off. That still leaves 2/3, so about 150 people who, family, really good friends that, I still want them to be able to work, but just Austin as a whole, like to mention the number of people that I've worked with in the past that relied on events as well. I really don't know. It's I think any event when they start happening is going to be different.
Yeah.
Events have started happening back here in New Zealand. There are mainly with Super Rugby League, but you're talking stadiums between 20 and 40,000 people attend. I think, and I was just reading about it this morning, I believe last night a New Zealand band, very successful New Zealand band called Lab or LAB. They just did a sold-out arena show here in New
Oh wow!
Zealand as the world's first.
So people know it is the that was the 3rd of where are we? July, 3rd of July. So that's got to be the first show of that size in the world that's happened then since March.
Yeah, I think the arena, and again, I haven't read the article that well, but I think it's the same one that Billie Eilish played in, last year, and I think that's about 10,000 capacity.
So there was
and
no
I believe it was sold out.
and that was a normal scenario. There was no distancing or anything.
No distancing, nothing like that. I mean, I do know that New Zealand's picked up a few new cases of COVID, but the majority of them, in fact, as far as I'm aware, all of them were picked up at the border because our borders are still technically closed, I believe.
Was there quarantining scenarios?
Oh, it's like compulsory quarantine if you come in, 2 weeks. And it used to be that I said we were able to book ourselves into an Airbnb, which was quite pleasant. But I think that one's off the table now. You're going into a government run hotel at the moment and looked after.
See why? Well, I don't know why the rest of us aren't doing that. We're doing the opposite. We've got more cases than anybody else, apart from the
apart from the US.
And we're doing the opposite. We're saying to European countries, yeah, we're going to scrap the quarantining. We're going to have corridors with Spain and France and stuff. Just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, it seems a little bit. Again, I get it that a lot of people, need to make money. I mean, I'm on unemployment here in New Zealand at the moment. I mean, I think, again, we were lucky in New Zealand that the government really seems to me that they were trying their best to provide, financial support for businesses. We're doing their best to get through stuff. I mean, it was pretty staunch here in level 3 and level 4 of lockdown. There were times it was actually quite pleasant. It's just really nice and quiet. And
Serenity has taken something from that. Yeah, but the fact that you just July the 3rd or 4th, you've had an arena show, 10,000 people. It's it shows, doesn't it, that if you stick to those things and you implement them correctly, then that's what you can pull off. So I imagine your high streets and shops are. It's sounding a bit too much like the news now, isn't it? Instead of a discussion about entertainment, but the high streets and the shops are open and you're living relatively normally, I imagine.
Everyone's still being encouraged to maintain social distancing. Everyone's being encouraged to use any tracking apps that we've got. When you go into a restaurant or something like that, you should enter it in, but you can start seeing those just sort of slowly. But again, I think it comes from having a government and a leader that, is being, pretty forthcoming with information and keeping everyone posted.
So when events started happening again, so firstly, kind of how long ago was the first kind of small gig or whatever? I know you've been involved in some small gigs now, starting to put some stuff on. So yeah, what do they look like now, or what's the capabilities, and how long ago did you start trickling them back in? What did they look like?
When I first came back, I started talking to a friend of mine who's an artist here in New Zealand, but she now owns a very cool vegan wine bar, deli, restaurant kind of thing, but it's in a warehouse. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a good sized place. It's not huge, but it's good. We did our sixth one last Wednesday. So that was like 6 weeks ago that we started these shows. Okay. And we were in level 2, which, there was certain criteria. It was like they had to be seated, they had to be at a table, one waiter per table, and you couldn't seat people that didn't know each other at a table. So we had a couple of challenges when it was like, okay, if 4 people booked tickets, well, that's fine. You can go and sit over there.
Yeah.
But if an individual booked a ticket, they just had to be
on their own.
Sorry, Mr. No Friends or Miss No Friends, sit over there in a chair by themselves. We got it working. We just kept the numbers.
I mean, it's not really about the finances at the moment, is it? It's just trying to get something out there, I guess. But if you're saying one person, one waiter per table, and your audience is between 50 and 100 or something, then how? Yeah, that's not financially viable, is it? Did they have to have a minimum spend and they had to drink a lot?
No, and again for this one, because based on capacity, we're only talking about 30 people, which was spread out over about 8 or 9 tables, which, it was kind of easy to manage. When you came in, you had to sign in, you had to give your either your email or phone number. But, I think in this case, it certainly wasn't about money. And in the case of what we're doing, the venue and 212 certainly weren't making very much at all. Most of the money was going back to the artists themselves. It was manageable. I think it was more the fact that what we saw, people were coming to the shows initially, not because of the artist, because there was something on.
It's just nice to dip the toe in the water again, isn't it? And everybody the artists to get back out there, the venue to start trading again, and you guys to start feeling like you're delivering something.
Yeah. We initially were only going to do 6 shows, and we're now up to 14, I think. And there were artists that you could, that were just concerned that just because people are allowed to go to an event doesn't mean they feel safe going to an event. And that was one of the things that we really pushed, and why we kept the numbers down. And we did market it a little bit along the way of, this is a nice, safe event for you to ease your way back into the things. And I think a lot of, we had a couple of people that bought tickets to every single show. They'd show up and would sort of say, so who's playing tonight? And you tell them and they'd say, so what are they like? It's sort of like they didn't even know what the music was, but it wasn't about the music as such. It was about getting out and supporting and just going to a show again. Our shows don't have a stage. It's a rug on the floor. It's very small, but the one thing that we did insist on was that all artists had to bring their own microphones, and that whilst we had microphones that we could use, and we, would have been making sure they were being sterilized, but it just became easier to tell the artist, you're bringing your own mics. But again, we did do some distancing from the artist, but again, we're also talking about majority is just singer-songwriters, that kind of thing. So
well, it's just nice to hear that there's shows up and running, and I think that's got to be the next step. The bars are open. They say the venues can open. There's still rules about the distancing, and obviously we all need to have the common sense and put our own things into practice anyway. But that's got to be the next step, to get an artist up on the stage, being allowed to do that. I mean, that just seems a little bit far-fetched to say that the audience can be there, but a solo artist who's not projectile vomiting over the crowd is surely in the same boat as everybody else. Especially if their distance and bringing their own mics is a great thing, all of that stuff. So hopefully we're not too far off that, and I think people are crying out for it. And whilst the weather holds out until the great English winter time kicks in, we've only got a couple of months left that we can really do those things and do some stuff outside as well. I think that the things that you've implemented sooner and now doing shows and opening bars, we seem to be doing it in the reverse. We're opening the things before we're doing the tracing and that stuff properly. The government would obviously give you a different answer on that. But what about back in the UK then? So you work with The Great Escape. You still involved with that?
Yes, as in 212 provides some logistic operations for Great Escape. This year was going to be my first one back in about 5 years, which I was really looking forward to. And 212 provided a lot of the, we used to deliver all the riders, all the branding. We managed the boneyard and storage. We had a crew that did all the loading out on the beachfront. You know, you can imagine, knowing Brighton, what a nightmare loading in backline and stuff like that could be when you're only allowed a vehicle down there at certain hours of the day. And so we laid on quite a few crew for that. And, you know, I was really looking forward to getting back because it's been a long time. And, you know, it's always good to see the people that you've known in the past that are still working there. And it would have been fun.
That size venue, you know, the places down there are, you know, there's basements and just things that just aren't conducive with distancing and stuff. And this is what we're all missing out on massively, isn't it? There's this big campaign at the moment over here, Let the Music Play, which you may be aware of, which is just that sort of cry for some sort of recognition, really, from all across the industry. Have you worked with the government down there? Maybe not you personally, but the events industry and the theatres? And
from my understanding, the New Zealand government has always been quite supportive of arts in this country. I want to say that I read somewhere that they had put a bunch of additional funding, you know, like millions, into helping the creative industry. But I'm not sure if that was part of a normal, this is part of our budget for the year, or if it was something extra. I do know that, like everyone, a lot of artists, you know, were hurting from it.
What about venues? Have there been venues that are closed down? Or
I'm sure there have been, but I haven't heard of any at the moment. I mean, unfortunately, in Christchurch, where I live, we lost a lot of venues during the earthquakes that happened 7 or 8 years ago, and so there obviously are a number of venues down here, but again, because most of them have been closed, I'm still actually finding out where all these venues are. And, you know, in fact, today I'm going to check out a space that might or might not make for a small pop-up venue. I mean, you just don't know until you explore it. But I think here in at least Christchurch, a lot of people have had to get creative anyway.
So there's an angle. So the next sort of question is about where things are going now, and what we have to do to make events happen now, and what they're going to look like, and the positive side of that. So like you said, the creativity, and people have to think a bit harder and maybe come up with some really cool, exciting things. And actually, is maybe the pop-up venue going to be more, in the short term at least, the way people are going to see and do things?
I think so. I mean, obviously they'd be smaller capacity, but it's still better than nothing. I mean, New Zealand's in a fortunate situation at the moment. I know this is going to sound a little bit, but I always wish that I had shares in a VR AR company at the moment, because I could see that being a real direction that a lot of artists will take, especially some of the bigger touring artists. You know, I was reading somewhere where people are putting on digital tours and everything like that, where ticketing or viewing is being geo-fenced around a particular area, wondering how long it takes before some artists just hire a venue and bring in camera crew and things like that and play a show every night for 2 weeks. But it's being geo-fenced to particular areas.
Each night.
Yeah, and
so you could just edit the opening. Hello, Manhattan. You know.
Yeah, or you know, you could be real with it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just could see a lot of
quick t-shirt change.
Yeah, a lot of agents and things like that just turning around and saying, you know, like, we don't have to worry about hotels so much. We don't have to worry about transportation. We don't have to worry. You know, I mean, like, it would start impacting on the budgets I think there was an article that's been floating around at the moment about a kind of a DJ guy called Mark Relevant or something like that. But he just did a drive-in tour through the US, and he normally would average about 2,000 people a show, but they reckon that he's quadrupled his attendance by just doing these vehicle things, because he was playing places that would allow, like 600 vehicles. Well, each vehicle seemed to be full with like 4 people. And so the numbers there, and that one's floating around at the moment, that article, which is kind of interesting.
There's
as horrible as I think drive-in shows potentially are. I don't know quite why I think that, but I just don't like the idea of it. But
you're not alone. This has come up with every chat I've had so far.
People, like I said, people are getting creative, and you look at some events that are still going on and seem to be doing pretty well. ISO Aid was one, the Australian festival, which really was a festival. The amount of bands, I mean, they go on for a couple of days. And then from an industry perspective, things like this, for example, there's no way that a number of us would have even thought about doing something like this 6 months ago, like Zoom meetings and attending seminars and conferences and things like that. I've certainly learnt so much just from that. The other side of it, I'm one of the other reasons why I get up so early is that I'm studying for my project manager certification, which is not something that I would have considered doing in a million years if COVID hadn't happened, So, I mean, there's a lot of that as well.
That was going to be the question.
Again,
what positives can we find from this, or your personal experiences, and what good things are coming out of this?
Mental health for a lot of people in the industry, I think is quite an important thing too. So I mean, I think you've got to be occupied. One of the things when we first kicked off, when it first started happening, I was still in Austin at that time, and I was studying Tai Chi. I worked with the club I was there to stream a lot of their beginner classes, and we put it out around social media for a lot of industry. If nothing else, if you're going to be stuck in the house, well, you can also be stuck in the house and doing things. And a lot of that was just because of the mental health aspect, not just the, staying fit or anything like that.
What do you think tomorrow looks like, metaphorical tomorrow? What next year, what down the line, what do you think is the next step globally, or what do you think shows might look like in the future?
I think it is going to be with us for some time. I mean, I don't think anyone really knows, I mean, it's
of course, it's all the unknown. That's the trouble.
If you look at, I think it's down to countries being responsible about some of the stuff. We've all seen what's going on in the US at the moment, which doesn't lend well, or provide much optimism for anything. I mean, I'd certainly, even having to go back to keep our green cards up and current is something that we've seriously got to think about. I just don't know. All go well, optimism and let's get started again, until it doesn't.
Well, thank you, Cary, for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Really good to catch up. Thanks very much. I hope it does all work out. It sounds like it's a nice scenario you've got down there, and maybe enjoying the 30-50 people shows in the barn, in the warehouse. It sounds quite a nice environment. Slower pace of life maybe suits us all every now and again.